Tel Arad's a really, really interesting find. This is an 8th century, before the Common Era temple at a fortress site called Tel Arad that was at kind of a trading outpost. And in this Tel Arad, there was a miniature version of the Temple of Jerusalem. And they say this because of the design of this site. This is the larger fortress itself, and the temples in the part.
So yeah, there's the fortress, which is later, but then there's an earlier Canaanite city, correct?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. It's built on top of a Canaanite city. I think that's probably even it down below there. And so it was, a Canaanite site. You know what I mean? And you got to remember when this stuff was all active, right? The Hebrews were basically practicing the Canaanite religion. They're polytheistic. And this particular temple was known, although it's a miniature version of the Temple of Jerusalem with its small enclosed structure, the Holy of Holies. This is where these incense altars were found that contained both canon. Here it is here. Now, this was an enclosed room. It's about the size of a broom closet, right? Those altars are probably like 1.5 feet and 2 feet, 2.5 feet in the front there. So they're not very big at all. There's 2 standing stones there as well. And this would have all been enclosed. And the altar on the left had residues of frankincense in it. And the altar on the right had residues of cannabis resins. And they're saying not cannabis flowers, but actual cannabis resins.
And actually, and I don't know if this is correct, because I know that there was 2 different phases of archaeology that happened on the site, which was one in like 1960 where they didn't discuss any sort of psychoactive or entheogen compounds, and then the one that happened more recently. Now, did they mix the cannabis with animal fat? Is that to get it like smoky or something?
Burnt on dung, animal dung. And that was not an uncommon fuel, right? Back in those days, animal dung still used in some parts of the world, cow dung, cow patty, stuff like that, as a cooking fuel and heating fuel. And so this was burnt on animal dung, and the frankincense was burnt on animal fat. They feel the temperature of the dung was more suitable for releasing the cannabis resins than the fatty oil that was used for the frankincense, right? Now, they know this was a Hebrew temple. There was an inscription found that said the house of Yahweh here, right? You know what I mean? So it's clearly a Hebrew temple. But also at this site were figurines of a goddess, Asherah. And Asherah is typically a Canaanite goddess, but the Hebrews also worshipped her.
Yeah,
And
didn't some of the Minoan and Greek cultures also, I think, too, maybe?
these Near Eastern cultures, like these Near Eastern goddesses, they kind of take on their own regional flavor, right? And so there's kind of a lot of interrelation between Aphrodite and Ishtar and a lot of these variations, right? They probably all go back to an earlier goddess, and a big commonality is cannabis use in them. We see cannabis use in the cult of Ishtar, where it was used in an infused beer. We see large offerings of cannabis at the temple of Inanna. The Hittite goddess Ishura as well, probably, who may be the prototype here, because she goes considerably far back in time. And the Hittites are Indo-European speaking peoples, and the Indo-Europeans have a particularly long history with cannabis use, going back 5,500 years ago at archaeological sites, right?
And people, if you're interested, go listen to our previous episode we did with Chris. I think I added the link down below, but we talk about Soma, and then the Indo-Iranian migrations and the break-off, and then you get the Rig Veda from the Northwest Indian people, and then you get the Avesta from the people that went down into Iran.
Absolutely. And Ishra, we know specifically her connection is really clear. There's a inscription that says quite explicitly, the salve of Ashira is cannabis. The salve of Ashira is Kanabu. It is said so, and so it's pretty clear that this was a pretty important plant to her. Now, these before this, and so figurines of Asherah were found at this site in Tel Arad. And before even this cannabis information was known, Tel Arad was well known for its evidence of the combined worship of Yahweh and Asherah. And there's other inscriptions from the Levant that show that Asherah was at one time coupled with Yahweh as his wife. This is the wife of God. You know what I mean? And a large part of what's taken place here, and why the cannabis is lost, and this is what's revealed by the Canna references as well, is the suppression of this goddess. You know, in the initial references regarding Canna, Exodus 30:23, it's used in the holy anointing oil, which is burnt along with incense in the tent of the meeting, and the Lord spoken to over the pillar of smoke. This is like the concrete version of the tent of the meeting right here before us. You know, it's a little enclosed space, but there's two altars in there, right? You know, and much of the Old Testament, Kings and Chronicles, is concerned with people worshiping Asherah alongside Yahweh. They do purges in the temple, remove the Asherah poles, and
Isn't the one standing stone not there anymore at the museum in
there's
Israel?
a standing stone there now. It's unclear exactly what the
So,
deal is.
do you
You know,
think
one of
that
the why
when we're
this
talking about we're talking about a little bit of polytheism, right? So, like,
yeah,
when they switch to monotheism and there's one God and you shouldn't take another God's name but me, that kind of a thing.
yeah,
Is
exactly.
that so? Then they start to alter.
This is this site. The reason that it's so well preserved, like that, the big problem with identifying plant matter and cannabis and things like that in the ancient world is all this stuff decomposes. This site was so particularly well preserved because it was not that those altars were knocked over, buried, and a floor put over them in a day, and then they sat like that for like thousands of years, right?
Is
Until they
that
were
what
done.
preserved them? Is that what they say preserved the cannabis oil? Yeah.
Say, and this is during the time of Hezekiah, right? And so, although the initial references to cannabis, as I was saying, were positive, the anointing oil, the last references, which preserves, specifically refers to both frankincense and cannabis, just as at this altar site, is, what do I care of your frankincense from Shiva? Your canna from a distant land does not please me. And this is in Jeremiah 6:20. Later in Jeremiah 44, this is after the fall of Jerusalem by the Babylons, right? He comes into Jewish people in Egypt, and he blames them for the fall of Jerusalem and their other Jerusalem people because they burned incense to the Queen of Heaven, right?